The demand came in the form of a folded letter shoved in my mailbox. No envelope, no stamp, just crumpled printer paper with the HOA letterhead and a signature that made my eye twitch in annoyance. Trisha Goldwin, HOA President. Due to community interest and fair usage expectations, it read, your private access to Lake Waverly will now be reclassified as communal property. I laughed out loud standing in my driveway, the paper flapping in my hand. Communal, huh? That lake access had been part of my deed since I bought the place 6 years ago. I'd even paid a premium just because the property backed right up to a narrow trail that led down to the water. It was mine, not the HOA's, not Trisha Goldwin's. I walked straight into my house and called up my real estate lawyer. After a quick read-through of the documents, he confirmed what I already knew. The HOA had zero authority to take that land. They couldn't reclassify anything, but that didn't stop them from trying. The next day, I caught Trisha and 2 of her HOA minions, Nancy and Carol, both in their mid-50s, both glaring at me like I'd stolen Christmas, standing at the trailhead behind my fence. Trisha had a clipboard and the kind of haircut you could set your watch to. This path should be open to the community, Franklin, she said, pretending to be civil. It's unfair that you've had exclusive access for all these years. It's on my deed, I said flatly. You're not touching it. Trisha narrowed her eyes like I'd just insulted her homemade banana bread. You can't gate off a natural resource. It's selfish, I shrugged. Then sue me. And that's when the real game started. Within a week, I started getting violation notices from the HOA. Grass too long it wasn't. Trash bins visible from the street they weren't. Unauthorized lawn ornament, a solar-powered gnome my niece gave me. They were trying to pressure me into surrendering the path. So I did what any stubborn, spite-fueled man would do. I installed a 6-foot steel gate across the trail entrance. Painted it forest green to match the trees, put concrete posts in the ground, and added a heavy-duty padlock. I even mounted a sign, private property. No trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. 2 days later, Trisha was back, standing at the gate in a floral blouse and oversized sunglasses like she was on a power trip vacation. This is outrageous, she snapped. You can't block off community land like this. It's not community land, Trisha, it's mine. You're creating division in the neighborhood. No, I said. You are. She stormed off, muttering something about legal action, but I knew she wouldn't get far. I had every document, every survey, every title line proving the land was mine and mine alone. And then I had the idea that turned the whole thing upside down. I posted a notice on the neighborhood board. Private lake access keys available to select residents, one-time fee. Within 48 hours, I had 10 people standing at my door, cash in hand. I started selling keys for $500 a pop. The first knock came just after sunrise on a Saturday. I opened the door in pajama pants and a hoodie, coffee still steeping in the French press. Standing on my porch was a man in a navy windbreaker, clipboard tucked under his arm, badge clipped to his belt. Franklin Hayes, he asked, voice clipped but not unfriendly. That's me, I said, stepping out and closing the door behind me. Something going on, he gestured toward the sidewalk where a black city vehicle idled. Code enforcement, we've received a complaint that you're charging for access to public property. I blew out a breath and motioned for him to follow me around the side of the house. Walk with me. I want to show you something. We took the gravel path down to the gate. I pointed at the concrete footings, then the property marker embedded in the soil just behind a hedge. Check the parcel map, I said. This sliver of land is mine. It's been mine since I bought the place. Deeded, surveyed. Recorded, he nodded slowly, flipping through a packet in his clipboard. You're right, I have the GIS overlay here, that's your lot line. Then I assume we're done here, I said, crossing my arms. He tapped a pen to the edge of the clipboard. You're in the clear. But this came from someone on your HOA, multiple reports filed under different names. Same handwriting. I raised an eyebrow. That legal? He glanced at me, then at the gate. If they're faking identities on city paperwork, that's fraud. I followed up with a call to the city zoning office Monday morning. Turns out 3 of the complaints had used identical phrasing and even the same misspelled word. Exclusive instead of exclusive. All 3 had return addresses tied to HOA board members. By Wednesday, I had forwarded everything to a local attorney who specialized in municipal fraud. He took one look at the complaint forms and said, "This isn't just petty. This could carry criminal penalties." The moment the word fraud entered the picture, things shifted. I got a visit from one of the residents who'd bought a key. A quiet guy named Lewis who worked nights at a distribution warehouse. He stood awkwardly on my porch, hands in the pockets of his windbreaker. "Trisha cornered me at the mailbox," he said. "Told me I'd be fined if I used the gate again, said I was trespassing." I leaned against the door frame. "Did you tell her you had written permission to access private property?" He nodded. "She said the board voted to override it." I blinked. "Override a legal agreement, that's not how any of this works." Lewis looked down at his shoes. "She said they'd revoke my parking permit." I stood upright. "That's retaliation, Lewis. Illegal. Document it." He pulled out his phone. "Already recording. Got the whole thing." That audio became the first domino. In it, Trisha clearly stated that she'd make life difficult for anyone who collaborated with me. She even threatened to reassess property values for those with keys. I sent the clip to the city attorney's office and my lawyer. Within 24 hours, I was asked to appear before the Municipal Ethics Board for a formal complaint hearing. I wasn't being accused, I was the one filing the complaint. The meeting was held in a small conference room inside City Hall. I brought a binder with signed key agreements, a printed map of the property boundaries, and a flash drive with Lewis's audio and the fake complaint forms. My lawyer sat beside me, calm and composed. Across the table sat Trisha and 2 HOA board members, Nancy and Gordon. Trisha wore a blazer like she was heading to a job interview. Gordon looked half asleep. Nancy clutched a folder like it might save her soul. The ethics officer, a no-nonsense woman named Miss Chen, adjusted her glasses and looked over the documents. "Mr. Hayes, you're asserting that the HOA board submitted fraudulent complaints to municipal departments, then attempted to intimidate residents using retaliatory threats. Is that correct?" "That's right," I said. Miss Chen inserted the flash drive. The room filled with the sound of Trisha's voice, clear and sharp. "If you use that gate again, we'll reassess your parking rights. You're enabling a trespasser." When the clip ended, the silence was crushing. Nancy looked like she wanted to crawl under the table. Gordon scratched at his scalp and muttered something inaudible. Miss Chen turned toward the board members. "Did any of you submit these code complaints?" Trisha lifted her chin. "We acted in the interest of the community." "That's not what I asked," Miss Chen said coldly. "Did you falsify resident names on official paperwork?" "I filled them out, yes," Trisha admitted, "but the concerns were real. The names were placeholders." My lawyer leaned forward. "That's textbook fraud." Miss Chen didn't argue. She turned to a staff member and requested the city prosecutor be looped in. The ethics board couldn't press criminal charges, but they had the authority to refer the case, and they did unanimously. When we walked out of City Hall, I didn't say a word. My lawyer gave me a look that said, "You're winning. Stay quiet," so I did. But the real shift came 2 days later at the emergency HOA meeting. It was held in the community clubhouse, a beige box of a building that usually hosted holiday potlucks and bingo nights. This time, there were more chairs set up than usual, and they were filled. Dozens of residents showed up, some holding printouts, others clutching copies of the HOA bylaws. Word had gotten around fast. Trisha took the podium. "I want to begin by addressing the recent complaints made against this board. There's been a great deal of misinformation." A man near the back stood up. "Is it misinformation that you submitted fake names to the city?" Murmurs spread across the room. Trisha hesitated. "I used aliases to expedite the reporting process. Is that legal?" A woman up front asked, arms crossed. Trisha's mouth opened, then closed. That's when I stepped forward. "I'd like to propose a motion," I said, holding up a printed document. "Full recall of the HOA board effective immediately. Grounds: abuse of power, fraud, and retaliation." Someone seconded it before she could speak. A vote was held. Ballots were passed out and people scribbled quickly. As they tallied the votes, Trisha sat stiffly, her face tight. Out of 72 households, 58 voted in favor of the recall. The board was dissolved on the spot. 3 residents volunteered to form an interim committee while a new board was organized. I declined a nomination to serve, but offered to help review governance documents quietly behind the scenes. Afterward, Trisha stormed out without a word. I walked home through the dusky evening, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. When I reached the gate, I paused. The padlock still gleamed under the porch light, the sign was still there. But now a new notice was posted beside it, an official one: private property. Access by permission only. Verified by city zoning office. And beneath that, a handwritten note someone had tacked up: "Thanks for standing up." I didn't recognize the handwriting, but I didn't need to. The first sign that things weren't over came 3 weeks after the vote. I was checking the mail when my neighbor, Celeste, a retired schoolteacher with a habit of walking her parrot in a stroller, waved me over. Her usual cheery demeanor was replaced by something tight and cautious. "I heard something strange at the post office," she said, lowering her voice. "A clerk mentioned a bulk order of certified letters, all sent from a P.O. box downtown. Apparently they were addressed to residents in our neighborhood." I raised an eyebrow. "Any idea what they were for?" She glanced around and leaned in. "Eviction threats from a legal firm." But the kicker is, it wasn't a real firm. The address on the letterhead is a UPS store. Someone's running a scare campaign. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went inside, booted up my laptop, and started digging. It didn't take long. A few residents had already started posting scans of the letters on a local forum. The language was aggressive phrases like "unauthorized access to restricted property" and "subject to immediate legal action." The signature at the bottom was a generic alias J. Mathers-esque. But the watermark in the corner of the letter caught my eye. It was identical to the design Trisha used for her old HOA newsletters. I printed out the letters and cross-referenced the addresses. Every single recipient had purchased a key from me. By the following evening, I had traced the P.O. box rental to Gordon, the same Gordon who sat silently during the ethics board meeting. He had registered it using a Shell LLC filed under his cousin's name. But the payment, that came from the HOA's old operating account, the one that was supposed to be frozen after the board was dissolved. I drove straight to the bank the next morning, paperwork in hand. The branch manager confirmed my suspicion. The account had been accessed twice since the recall. Both times, funds were wired to a company called Fairway Legal Solutions, which didn't exist in the state's corporate registry. "I need to file a fraud report," I told the manager. "You're not the first to ask," she said, pulling open a drawer. "2 other residents came in this week." I left with a copy of the transaction records and headed straight to the police department. Detective Marquez met me in a cluttered office that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and paper toner. He listened without interruption as I laid out the timeline: the shell company, the fake legal letters, the reused watermark, the bank transactions. His expression didn't change until I mentioned the HOA funds. "They used community money to open a sham law firm?" he asked, finally looking up from his notepad. "Not just open it," I said. "They used it to threaten residents." He stood up, grabbed a folder, and motioned for me to follow him into a different room. This one had a whiteboard covered in sticky notes and timelines. "They've been on our radar," he said. "We've had scattered complaints, nothing solid until now. But this is coordinated fraud, mail fraud too if they sent those threats through the Postal Service." "They did," I said. "Certified mail." He nodded once, then pointed to an evidence bin in the corner. "Leave the documents there. We're opening an investigation today." By Friday, subpoenas had been issued. A city marshal arrived at Gordon's house with 2 officers and walked out with a desktop computer, several boxes of files, and 2 phones. That same evening, a squad car parked outside Trisha's home. She refused to open the door at first, but when they came back with a warrant, she had no choice. The neighbors watched from their porches as officers escorted her down the driveway. No cuffs yet, but the silence in the neighborhood afterward was louder than any siren. The following week, I was invited to give a statement under oath at the district attorney's office. I arrived with my lawyer and a binder 3 inches thick. The assistant DA, a sharp-eyed man named Colburn, flipped through the pages slowly. "You're saying they used HOA funds to impersonate legal authority, target residents, and intimidate them into relinquishing property rights." "Exactly," I said, "and every keyholder was targeted. They didn't go after anyone else." Colburn closed the binder. "We're charging them with misappropriation of funds, criminal impersonation, and attempted extortion. Possibly more, depending on what we find in the financial records." When I left the office, I noticed a news van parked across the street. Word was spreading fast. By the weekend, Channel 9 ran a segment titled Lake Access War, HOA Gone Rogue. They interviewed Lewis, who described how Trisha had tried to pressure him into giving up his key. They even played a short clip of the gate, padlock gleaming in the sun, as the anchor described the unraveling of a suburban power scheme. And then came the lawsuit. A class action filing representing 29 residents, including several elderly homeowners, accused the former board of financial abuse and intimidation. I wasn't part of the suit. I had my own countersuit in motion, but I offered to help everyone organize their documentation. We met in the clubhouse, the same place where Trisha once stood with her clipboard and clipboard attitude. This time it was buzzing with energy. People brought folders, spreadsheets, even audio clips. One woman played a voicemail where Trisha threatened to revoke neighborhood privileges if she continued to fraternize with that lake profiteer. I nearly laughed when she said the phrase, but the tone was menacing. The interim committee, now fully ratified into the new board, voted unanimously to implement a transparency rule. All HOA financial records would be published quarterly. No exceptions. They also launched a new policy that required any legal action pursued on behalf of the HOA to be approved by a majority resident vote. No more rogue legal threats. A month later, I received an official notice from the county. The gate path had been re-verified in the property database, and a permanent easement had been attached to my deed. No one, not a future HOA, not a city planner, not even a developer, could alter its designation without my explicit consent. I framed the document and hung it in my study, but the final blow didn't come from me. It came from a woman named Evelyn, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. She'd been quiet through most of the ordeal. But when the case went to court, she showed up with a dusty binder of HOA meeting minutes dating back 2 decades. Inside were handwritten notes from an early land use vote 1 that showed Trisha had opposed the Lake Trail easement back when she was just a secretary on the board. She'd been trying to block it for years. Evelyn's testimony placed Trisha's actions in a long-standing vendetta. Her motive was personal, not communal. The judge took less than an hour to issue a ruling: full restitution of misused funds, community service, and a 5-year ban from serving on any civic board within the county. Gordon received a similar sentence, along with a misdemeanor conviction for impersonating a legal entity. When the verdict came down, I didn't celebrate. I just walked down to the gate, unlocked it, and stepped onto the trail. The lake was still. The trees reflected perfectly in the water. A few ducks drifted along the far edge. Behind me, I heard footsteps: Lewis, Celeste, and a few others. They stood quietly, looking out over the water. "You ever think about putting a bench down here?" Lewis asked. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think it's time." We pooled some money and built one ourselves, a simple wooden bench facing the lake with a small plaque mounted on the back. It didn't say much, just 3 words: earned, not given. Spring rolled in with a quiet confidence. The kind of season where the wind doesn't argue with you anymore, it just moves aside. I was in the backyard oiling the hinges on the lake gate when I heard a voice behind me. "You've got a visitor, Franklin," Celeste called from the side fence. "He says he's with the state." I wiped my hands on a rag and walked around, half expecting another reporter or some zoning official with a clipboard. Instead, a tall man in a gray linen suit stood by his car, scanning the trailhead with interest. He extended a card before I could ask. "Marshall Tennyson," he said. "Office of the Inspector General." I read the name twice before looking up. "Didn't think this was big enough for state-level involvement." He nodded once, scanning the nearby houses. "Normally, it wouldn't be, but your HOA was part of a regional network of boards using the same property management consultant. That consultant is now the subject of a multi-county investigation." I let that sink in as we walked toward the bench by the lake. Tennyson sat, pulled out a notebook, and tapped the cover. "Your HOA's former treasurer, Gordon, was funneling money not just into that shell company but into a joint account with a firm called Pinnacle Community Advisors. They're not licensed in this state." I leaned on the back of the bench. "Let me guess." "They set up fake legal entities, draft custom scare letters, and coach board members on how to push residents around without leaving fingerprints." Tennyson gave a single nod. "That's the outline. What's surprising is how far it went here. They weren't just trying to intimidate. They were laundering embezzled fees through those shell firms and disguising it as community improvement consulting." So the fake law firm was a front. No, it was worse. It was a tool. The real damage was in the financials, over $80,000 in unapproved transfers over 2 years. Most of it happened before the recall. I sat down beside him. "You're saying this wasn't just about my trail, it was a part of something bigger." "Exactly. Your gate just exposed the infection." We sat in silence for a moment, listening to the breeze move through the reeds. He stood up, slipped the notebook back into his coat, and handed me a sealed envelope. "That's a subpoena. You're not in trouble, but we need your testimony. Grand jury's being assembled next week." I let out a breath through my nose and nodded. "I'll be there." The grand jury convened at the county courthouse, a gray building with cracked stone steps and a humming HVAC unit that sounded like it was on its last leg. I was one of 14 witnesses called, but the only one who brought a full binder of annotated evidence. The prosecutor asked precise questions. I answered each without hesitation. Who was present at each meeting when the first signs of retaliation occurred, what exactly had been said in the audio recordings, and how the funds were funneled post-recall. When I finished, the prosecutor turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't just about an HOA enforcing rules. This is about a coordinated scheme to seize private property, manipulate residents, and reroute funds under the guise of neighborhood governance." It was a racket. The indictments were unsealed 10 days later. Trisha was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying municipal records. Gordon faced money laundering and embezzlement. The third board member, Carol, was charged with obstruction and knowingly facilitating the creation of a fraudulent legal entity. Pinnacle Community Advisors folded within 48 hours of the news breaking. Their website disappeared overnight, and their registered office turned out to be a rented space above a shuttered dry cleaner. I thought that would be the last of it. But then, a man named Ray Navarro showed up at a community meeting. He was soft-spoken, in his 60s, and wore a faded work shirt with a real estate firm's logo on the pocket. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, standing near the coffee urn. "But I used to manage a property across town, same consultant, same HOA script. They tried to push a couple out of their home when they refused to pay a bogus fine. Someone asked what happened. They lost the house. But after your case went public, they reached out. Turns out Pinnacle used the same shell companies. They've filed a lawsuit." The room went silent. The new HOA president, a retired architect named Vernon, stood up and addressed the group. "We're going to support them, and we're going to audit every outside vendor this community's ever worked with." I stayed after the meeting, helping fold chairs and collect ballots. Vernon approached me as I was locking up. "You started something here," he said. "We're thinking of forming a coalition neighborhoods that have been targeted by these consultant racket boards, if you're interested." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah. Let's do it." Over the next 4 months, we held monthly gatherings in the clubhouse. Not just our neighborhood, others joined in from across the county. People brought documents, horror stories, and names of shadowy firms that operated just on the edge of legality. We created a shared database. Lawyers volunteered time. A tech-savvy teenager from across the lake even set up a website where people could anonymously submit scanned documents and track red-flagged companies. By midsummer, the district attorney's office had opened 5 new investigations based on information that came through our coalition. But the best moment came quietly. It was an evening cookout, hosted by Lewis and his wife on their back patio. A dozen neighbors, kids running in the yard, someone grilling skewers. Nothing fancy. Celeste pulled me aside near the lemonade cooler. "You know that trail," she said, motioning toward the gate. "I hadn't walked it in years, not until you put up that sign." I smiled. "Still holding up, better than most of us," she said. "That bench, it's where my grandson proposed to his girlfriend last week, right there by the water." I looked down the path, just visible past the fence line. The light caught the edge of the plaque. "I guess it really is earned," she patted my shoulder, "and now protected." The final chapter came in the form of a letter, hand-delivered, not by mail. It was from the State Attorney General's office. "Mr. Hayes," it read, "due to your documentation, testimony, and organizing efforts, your contribution to the exposure of fraudulent HOA practices has been instrumental in preventing further abuse across the region. Enclosed is a certificate of recognition, signed by the governor." I didn't frame it. I didn't even hang it. I just slid it into the back of the binder where everything started. The gate still stands. Locked but not closed. Every person with a key earned it. Not because they paid me, but because they stood up when it counted, and Trisha, last I heard, she was facing sentencing. Her lawyer tried to argue for probation, citing her work in community leadership. The judge wasn't impressed. "You didn't lead," he said, according to court transcripts. "You schemed. You used your neighbors like pawns and treated power like a private inheritance." That ends today. She got 18 months in county jail, plus restitution and a 10-year ban from any community governance role. Gordon took a plea deal. House arrest. Carol testified and walked away with a fine. The HOA bank accounts were frozen, audited, and reopened under new oversight. Every resident received a refund check for the overcharges, small but symbolic. And the lake still quiet, still ours, no banners. No fences, just water, trees, and a trail that leads to a bench where people go to remember something simple. Some things aren't given. They're defended.